We got Gators Breakdown here. We know we're business.
Gators Breakdown, because there's never a dull moment in Gator Nation.
The Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go. I am your host, David Waters. You can find me on social media at GatorDave_SEC. And as we are every year when that Athlon magazine hits the newsstands, I get my good buddy Braden Gall to jump right here on Gators Breakdown. We'll go through the Athlon magazine a bit, get his thoughts on the Gators, some of the SEC as well. But Braden, once again, outstanding job with the magazine and the Athlon podcast. I know you're a part of. You're on ESPN Radio. You filled in for Five Bomb about a month or so ago, and thanks for bringing me on that day because it was when the Jaden Rashada news dropped. So we had it on there. But you guys, you can find Braden everywhere out there. I know a lot of you enjoy Braden's work. You've told me so. So we bring him right here on Gators Breakdown. And Braden, thanks for doing it once again.
Well, thank you to the audience for all the kind words. Yeah. I don't normally get a lot of kind words from Florida fans. No, I'm just kidding. No, it's great to talk to you, man. Always a pleasure. You guys do great stuff, and even though I don't have a whole lot to do with the magazine as much as I used to, it is still something we're super, super proud of, and it's on newsstands now. So go support the company. Go buy a magazine. We really do appreciate it. It's great to have. I don't know if you hypothetically are sitting on a beach next week. It's a great thing to have if you're going to go sit on a beach and read. Look, there you go. There's a nice copy of it right there.
Still waiting for that SEC version. Still waiting for that one.
Well, and so that's a blame 2024, David, on that one. It's definitely a different book than when we first started it, and we can, if you guys are interested, we can get into some of those details. But so the main things are still the same. The anonymous coaching scouting reports, our predictions are definitely, like, we had to change our predictions.
Yeah.
Because we used to do sort of an end of season prediction, and that's still the case, but our bracket doesn't match up with our rankings necessarily, because if you think the ACC champion is going to be number 12, which we do, then you have to sort of pick it that way, but then you have to put a bracket together based on what you think the committee is going to do. So it's a totally new experience for us, and we're very proud of the magazine. So, go buy yourself a copy, athlonsports.com. We really would appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Enjoy it. My favorite one from national perspective, my favorite one I get every year. So certainly enjoyed it one time. One read through already, but I'm sure I got flights coming up, vacation coming up. So it'll be my airplane entertainment as we go through there. So Braden, let's dive right into it. Everybody hit that like button right quick before we get started in this conversation, and subscribe to Gators Breakdown, your favorite podcast platform, or right here on YouTube. But you guys put Gators in the 11th spot in the predicted order of finish between Auburn and Kentucky. For a power ranking, personally, I'd have Florida ahead of Auburn, but they are grouped right there. But, of course, I think schedule comes into play a bit in this predicted order of finish. And then 35th overall in the country as well for the Gators.
So it's a group thing that we do when we put together the rankings, right? It's not just one person, what they think of a particular team. So if, like, you think really highly of Ole Miss versus I think really highly of Alabama, somebody else might think really highly of Texas, and we have to figure out, eventually we have to put teams into those spots at some point. So I think when you look at those three teams you mentioned, I do think those three teams are the teams that are all lumped together in that group. I think Auburn, Florida, and Kentucky are all going to be better than people realize. I think all three of them are top 25 good. One, if not two of them, are probably going to challenge for the top 25, and we can get into why we think that is. Certainly efficient quarterback play and a very strong offense for Florida. Year number 3, continuity. Don't know about the defense. Kentucky, I think, really good defensive line. I think Auburn is going to be better, but how much better? My personal rankings, not to pander here, David, but my personal rankings would be Florida ahead of Auburn. I would have it in order. I would have it Florida, Kentucky, Auburn in that order. But all three of them, I think, are, again, if you want to say they're 27, 28, 29, if they're 30, 31, 32, or even if one of those teams cracks the top 25, I think that's okay for all three of them in terms of projecting where they're going to be. So I think there's a lot of reasons to like all three of these teams. And because there's so many more teams in the SEC now with Texas and Oklahoma, it's like these three aren't going to get covered very much, even though I think they're pretty good football teams.
Yeah, I like the way you put that. That would be my power ranking for all of them too, and simply because of Graham Mertz. I mean, I think better quarterback situation than both. We'll see what Vandegrift does at Kentucky, but certainly better what Auburn has. But Auburn has some really good weapons at receiver spots. So how does that equal out? I mean, that's what you're saying. You really can throw these three teams in a blender, and whatever ranking you come out with could be completely fine. Brady, I thought about this, and this was really interesting for me. How different would you feel, and how different would you think others would feel if Florida had Missouri's schedule?
Very. I mean, even Texas's schedule for being in the SEC for the first year, like they've got, I want to say they've got Kentucky, Mississippi State, Vanderbilt, like all in their schedule. And so I think, yes, Florida got absolutely no favors. Oklahoma got no favors. And honestly, I would include Texas A&M in this group. Like if Florida wins the game, which is not unreasonable, if they beat Miami and A&M in the beginning, and then you split with LSU and Ole Miss at the end, all four of those games, I believe, at home, right? So you can, if you take care of business on the front end, and I think Miami's really dangerous, but I don't trust the coaching staff. Texas A&M is going to be very, very good by the end of the year. So I think you get Texas A&M at a great time. Yeah. I think Mike Elko's the right guy for the job, but how good are they in week 3 at home? That's a game that if you're Billy Napier in year 3 and Graham Mertz is the quarterback that you think he's going to be, you got to win that game. So I think, honestly, Florida, if you beat A&M, I think A&M becomes a part of that 3-team group we just talked about. And if that's the case, then I think you're talking about top 25 teams, because I think A&M's got a chance to be a top 25 team. And I certainly don't want to play them at the end of the year. I think A&M beats Texas in the season finale. I think there's too much emotion on the line. But really, I think what matters with this particular game, I mean, this season for Florida, I think the Kentucky game is huge. Obviously, a big deal. Honestly, UCF is way better than people realize, but that's still a game you got to win if you're Napier. Just forget Georgia, forget Texas, and even if you want to forget Florida State and Tennessee, I think you can do that and still win the rest of your games. Tennessee, honestly, I mean, who knows? Florida still owns the Vols, relatively speaking. So who knows how good they're going to be. If you split LSU and Ole Miss, you get one of those two, I think you can get to 8 wins. And if you can get to 8 wins, I don't think there's enough downward pressure on Scott Strickland from the boosters. I don't think Scott Strickland's in danger of losing his job necessarily, unless the wheels fall off. And so I think Florida is actually a sneaky, sneaky good football team this year, better than people think.
After you and I sign off, I'm going to go into a conversation I brought up last week. It was most pivotal games for Florida, and I went Kentucky because of what's happened recently. Kentucky hasn't really beat a good Florida team since 2018. And I think that's been a pretty good indicator of the team Florida will have. Is if they lose at Kentucky, it's been a pretty good indicator that it's not going to be a really good Florida team. Now, it does come midpoint of the schedule, so I can understand. I think Miami's kind of like 1B, if you want to put that there. But Kentucky has given us a pretty good indication of how Florida is going to be in recent years.
I completely agree. And I think this is a good Kentucky team, as we've already talked about. Like, I think you can't underestimate how good Kentucky has been relative to Kentucky standards. I don't think you can undervalue how hard it is to completely change your offense almost every season and maintain a pretty good program the way Mark Stoops has done. Honestly, I said this on the show today, 440 Sports. Go check out the YouTube page. I would not be surprised if Mark Stoops retires at the end of the year because I think he's just looking at, like, Bob Stoops walked away early. His brother, he still had his health, had a lot of money. You know, he's got all the bourbon going on in Lexington. He tried to leave in December for the A&M job. I just think he realizes how hard it is to be this good at Kentucky. And he's been that good. Like, again, you break Bear Bryant's records, you're pretty good. You're doing something right. And again, this season, same story, right? Develop really good defensive lines, some players that are going to go high in the draft. Just in general, his ethos on defense makes them a very dangerous football team. Like, I think Kentucky would win at the line of scrimmage against Oklahoma right now. Do you realize how crazy that is to say out loud at this time? Like, Kentucky would beat Oklahoma up front, I think, on both lines of scrimmage. And that's just
they pretty much got every returner from offense and defensive line.
Yes, that's an insane thing to say. But at the same time, new coordinator, transfer quarterback, revamping the offense again. And I think, not to get off onto Kentucky here, but that program is much better than people give it credit for, considering the turnover they've had on offense. And so you got to win the games. If you're favored at home, Napier has to win those games. That's just it. Full stop, period, end of sentence, end of discussion. If you're favored at home, you got to win those games. I don't know if I haven't seen the lines on the Miami game, so I actually don't know if they're favored in that game or not. Miami will probably
they are, I believe.
Miami's going to be I think we've got them at number 20, so they're a preseason top 25 team. But I would guess Florida could be favored in every home game outside of maybe Ole Miss. I don't know what LSU is going to be at that point of the year. We don't know what Florida State's going to be at that point of the year, but probably good, probably dangerous. Certainly games that you're going to have to play your best to win. So it really does come down to what does this defense look like? And if they take a big step forward, they look a little bit more organized and more cohesive. It's sort of one of those weird things that we talk about in the SEC where it's like nobody just saw that Florida was just better than we thought. And if that's the case, again, I think you can get to 8-4, and if 8-4 looks good and DJ Lagway looks the part, I don't know why you wouldn't give him a fourth year. So
no, yeah, he's getting. I mean, I think he's 6 wins. He's getting it for sure. I really do. The admin does not want to move on. They really do not. So I think it would take less than a 500 record to even get the conversation started.
But again, the schedule is. I'm like, let's just reiterate, and I don't think Florida fans need to be told this, but it's absurd. Like this is an absurd schedule. Like you could be playing, I mean, upwards of 4 playoff teams, maybe 5 playoff teams. Like you just don't know how good some of these teams are going to be. Miami is absolutely a team that could win the ACC. So is Florida State. There's 2 right there, and that doesn't include the fact that Ole Miss, LSU, Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee all think they can make the playoff. So having that many playoff contenders on your schedule is absurd, and that didn't even include Kentucky and A&M. So UCF, I think, again, we've already mentioned this. KJ Jefferson is a perfect fit in Gus Malzahn's system. They're going to be a dangerous team in the Big 12 this year. So it is an absolutely brutal schedule. But if you win the games you're favored in, I think Florida's a team that we're talking about at the end of the year that because Napier, and this is what we just got done doing on our show, which is there's too much like spotlight on Billy Napier for Florida to be like underrated. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like there's too much talk about, the quote unquote hot seat, and everyone wants to talk about Billy Napier. And so therefore they're getting a lot of coverage. The schedule's really hard, so they get a lot of coverage. But if you were to tell me, because like no one's really talking about Kentucky, no one's really talking about Auburn. And I think, again, all 3 of these teams are about the same. I think all 3 of these teams are pretty solid this year. I think all 3 of these teams are going to pull some upsets that no one thinks, doesn't put that down in the preseason when we start penciling in wins and losses. And I think all 3 of them are going to be dangerous. And so which one? My bet is on the guy with the most established quarterback, and that is absolutely Graham Mertz.
Last thing about the schedule, Braden. I mean, Florida plays the Athlon predicted order of finish: number 1, Georgia; number 2, Texas; number 3, Ole Miss. Maybe for you, and maybe in the conversations y'all have in this magazine, if you could maybe glean this from some of the conversations you had, is it grading on a curve for this team a bit? For many, myself included, out there in Gator Nation, they need to see progress in pure wins and losses, no matter what the schedule is. This is Napier's roster. It's his process. If things are headed in the right direction, all the issues addressed that you brought up earlier, that should amount to wins. Is that too harsh? Is it too fair? There just hasn't been much equity built the last couple of seasons. So I think a good portion of the fan base is really looking at improvement this year. Schedule be damned.
Honestly, I don't really have a problem with any fan who looks at other coaches at other programs in the SEC and says it doesn't take very long normally. Didn't take Urban Meyer very long. Didn't take Kirby Smart very long. Coaches generally at big time programs, when they get to an elite level program like Florida or Georgia or Alabama or Ohio State or LSU, generally you're winning pretty big, pretty fast. And I think some of this is, I can sit here and talk about context. You and I can talk about context all we want to. Dan Mullen didn't recruit. They didn't have the infrastructure on the back end. They didn't have the resources for all the assistants and the scouting departments and the analytics. And we can talk about all that stuff, the indoor practice facility, on and on until we're blue in the face. Eventually it has to translate to wins at a place like Florida. So I actually don't have a problem with a fan saying, you know what, 6-6 is not good enough. He needs to go. And I think you and I have had this conversation before where I say, if that does happen, hypothetically, the program is in significantly better shape for the next guy to take over if that were to happen. And that is absolutely a credit to what Billy Napier and his staff has done. So you can't tell me that they haven't accomplished anything. I know why Florida fans think it doesn't feel that way. or it doesn't look that way. But you're going to have your first ever, like, this is the first quarterback he's ever recruited and played is going to be DJ Lagway. Like, there's a lot of context that I think as analysts we can put out there and say, this is why this is happening at Florida, and this is why it's taking this amount of time, or this is why you should be patient. And I understand fans who fall that direction and go, yeah, I agree. I want to see him with his own guys. I want to see him with the defensive staff. Can he fix a mistake that he made? Like, that's another question is you got to be able to do that kind of stuff. So I understand fans who are patient and understand context. And I also understand by year 3 at a program like Florida, it's about wins and losses, and you should be competing for championships. And so I kind of agree with both sides of it. And I know that's a cop-out answer. Personally, I think that's why 7 or 8 wins needs to be the mark. And then you can say, look, this program is making serious progress. But I understand all fans in this situation that they are frustrated and they need to see real, actual progress. And especially while Tennessee is taking huge strides forward, and you've got Georgia being what Georgia is. Now you're adding Texas into the mix and as another national championship contender in the conference. Like, I understand why Florida fans feel the way they feel.
Braden, so I got to get your take on this. This was, I noticed this, and I thought it was pretty funny. So no Gators on the Athlon first team All SEC, no issue there. But there is a former running back. His name is Trevor Etienne, first team All running back at Georgia. He's listed on the first team. Would he be first team if he was still in orange and blue?
So I didn't make that decision, but I don't know why the team would matter, honestly. Now, if you're projecting who makes first team, that's different. If we're saying like who we think is going to finish as a first team All SEC running back, then your situation and your surroundings absolutely take into account the fact that he's playing behind the best offensive line with maybe the number 1 overall pick at quarterback on the best coaching staff in America. Like, you have to eventually take that stuff into account. And it's not because of the brand or whatever. It's because if you play behind that offensive line with that quarterback, you're probably going to gain more yards and be more productive. So I think it's okay I don't have a problem with somebody saying, so-and-so is going to be better because they're going to be more productive because of X, Y, and Z. If you're saying in the preseason, who's the best running back in the conference, then I don't think it matters what team you're on. And if you're saying if the goal is to pick out the best running backs in America and put them first team All-America, second team, third team, then it doesn't matter what you're doing. A lot of times we're trying to project at the end of the season. And honestly, what's interesting about the SEC is the star power that we used to have in this conference, where we looked at like Todd Gurley's and we looked at Leonard Fournette's, and we looked at like these like super elite star power players at running back. There aren't a lot of them this year. There's really good quarterbacks. There's a handful of really good receivers, but like really, and honestly, we don't have this on the defensive line either. You look at like Will Anderson's and Jadeveon Clowney's. There's no one like that in this conference. There will be at the end of the year. And so we don't know who those guys are. Is it Hunter at Auburn? I think Dylan Sampson's pretty solid at Tennessee. Like, there's guys that are going to break out and become stars. I think on paper, it's easy to say that Etienne is one of the best running backs, one of the top 2 or 3 running backs in the conference. And if you're going to say, I'm going to project forward and say who's got the best chance to be a first team all SEC player at the end of the year, it's obviously going to be a guy playing for Georgia versus Florida, but that's not a knock on. Does that make sense? Like, it's not a knock on Florida or Georgia. It's just sort of like a statement of reality. Like, if you play for Ohio State, you have a better chance of being an all-conference running back than if you play for Iowa. Like, that's just what it is.
Yeah, I just wondered if he was still a Gator, would he still be listed as the first team running back? If you say who are the best 3 running backs in the conference. Yeah.
If he was playing at Vanderbilt, I would say he's one of the best 3 running backs in the conference. That's kind of where I'm at with that.
And we've seen that in the past, with Vandy running backs. So, I mean, they've got their credit when it's due there. Kind of to extend that, SEC unit rankings for the Gators, they don't have a single position group better than 8th, and that's for the running back group. I was a bit surprised to see the quarterback room ranked 9th with the return of Mertz and DJ Lagway on the sideline. Texas A&M ranked right ahead of Florida. LSU 2 spots ahead at 7, which is where I'd probably have Florida. Mertz, Nussmeier, Lagway on the sideline as well. Sure. I think kind of like the grouping of the teams, I think you can shuffle and whatever rolls out Yahtzee style, you're fine with it. But I'd probably be a little higher on Mertz and Lagway combo if I'm looking at an entire quarterback room.
I'd be fine with that. I don't have any arguments there. I do think A&M is sneaky good, though, with, I think, Marcel Reed, who actually is from here in Nashville. I think Marcel Reed, there's a chance he wins that job some way at some point during the season. And so if you've got Wigman and Reed, I think there's an argument there you can make that they're better. But again, I have no problem with the Florida ranking there is completely tied to the quality in the conference.
Yeah.
That like if you were to say who are the best 20 quarterbacks in America, like Graham Mertz is probably one of the top 20 quarterbacks in America, barely top 10 in the SEC. That's because you've got, you know, with the names they've got here with Brady Cook and Carson Beck and Jackson Dart and Nico and like it's just Jalen Milroe. Like there's so many good quarterbacks.
You can easily list off 5 before you even get
Absolutely.
there. Yeah.
So if you want to say they're 7th with the combo of Mertz and Lightweight, I'm totally fine with that. Like I don't have a problem with that at all. I would probably have LSU a touch lower as well. Again, these rankings are not mine. They're the magazines, they're the staffs, and so it's every one of these, the all conference, the rankings in the magazine and the unit rankings are largely done by a big group, and so we have to sort of put stuff down on paper. I would have probably A&M and Florida about even. I'm okay with LSU being behind them, and again, I would have no argument there. I think the offensive line almost could be a little bit better. I think they're ranked 10th in the conference. I think
transfer portal, so
you just kind of don't know sometimes with the portal. Like Tennessee claimed a guy in the portal. Like, is he going to be good? Like, offensive line is so hard to predict. I think you can kind of look at a couple of teams and you know that Georgia's going to be good, that LSU is going to be good. But like even folks have questions about Alabama, and they're one of our best offensive lines in the country. So the offensive line, and I actually just did a long, not to promote myself again, but 440 Sports YouTube page, I did a long like 40-minute conversation with Cole Kubelik. Like, I think there's an offensive line problem in college football.
Oh, we discussed it here too.
And I think it's a problem.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge problem. And I think it's happening on a developmental level at high schools. Like NFL players are not getting developed along the offensive line. And certainly in college, they're suffering as well. And so I think offensive lines are just really, really hard to pinpoint. But I think Florida's could be slightly better, which means that the best part of their team, not that I need to tell Florida fans this, but the best part of their team is sort of up the middle on offense, in the backfield, in the quarterback's situation, in the offensive line. That's a good place to start if you're going to start the season.
Yeah, and also, I mean, of course, you guys got to hit deadlines. This was even before some of the tail end of the last transfer portal window. Florida brings in Elijah Badger from Arizona State, which should honestly really help that group.
Yeah.
So, you know, that comes into play as well as far as timelines go.
Yes, and unfortunately, when you're working in print and not digital, you got to at some point send it literally out the door to the printer, and the printer has to put it all together, and there's like a 2-week turnaround there. And so it's always been that way. I think one time we had Everett Golson on the cover.
Oh, I remember that.
In a Notre Dame uniform.
Yeah.
And by the time the magazine came out, like, he was at Florida State, and we were like, oh man. And there's just some of those stuff you can't, like, we had Ole Miss and Baylor both ranked, I think, in the top 15. And I want to say the Hugh Freeze and the Art Briles scandals both happened at the same time. And so we were like, I guess we would have Baylor much lower and Ole Miss much lower. But like, you have to, you don't know that somebody's going to fall off a motorcycle in the middle of the summertime. Like, you don't know. So you have to. The portal has made it very, very hard. And here's the truth of the matter: it's not just us doing magazines,
right?
It's the coaches. Talking to these coaches, getting their scouting reports for all these other teams, which we do for every team in the magazine. We get them we get them anonymously, but they give us real stuff about these teams. And these coaches used to tell us really interesting stuff about players, about scheme, about what they're doing with this particular unit group or whatever. And there's none of that anymore because they don't know. They don't know what a team is going to be in May or June. Even like all they're studying right now is like trends. Like if I'm Billy Napier, I'm studying Miami's defensive trends. I'm studying Texas A&M's trends. They can't actually install any game plan right now. And not that you do that at this time of the year, but when fall camp comes around, you start installing stuff. You're not doing it for any one team because you have no clue what that team's going to be until that week arrives and you've actually seen them play games. So it's a really weird new part of the game. It's not just magazines and media and fans. These coaches know less about their opponents than ever before. And that's an interesting part of the game moving forward for sure.
Absolutely. Braden, a couple more thoughts from before I let you go. I know we talked schedule, but plain and simple, how big is that Miami game? I mean, you got 2 coaches, year 3, a lot of questions surrounding fan bases that probably, I know for certainly on the Gator side, but I know on the Miami side too, haven't been able to quickly or just fully buy in to their head coach and what the future holds for those guys if they're the right guy moving forward. I mean, you don't want to put too much on a game one, but both these programs are just really, really got the spotlight put on them in week one.
Yeah, the Brock Berlin Bowl. I find Miami to be one of the most interesting football teams in the entire country. They are so talented. Their offensive line is one of the best in America. Cam Ward and Damian Martinez, if you have not watched either of them play, they are really, really good. Damian Martinez is like a 235-pound battering ram, and he is extremely well coached at Oregon State. Cam Ward can do basically everything on a football field. I have no faith in the coaching staff. I just don't. And even though Billy Napier's had his moments, right, where multiple players wearing the same number are out there on special teams, like I trust Billy Napier in that situation. The game's at home. I just trust Florida a little bit more in that game, and Vegas agrees with me. So until Mario Cristobal does something more than what Mario Cristobal has always done, which is recruit a really good offensive line and not maximize his talent, I don't know why we would expect it to be different. And so I'm fascinated by Miami. They have all of the pieces to be an elite football team, and I just don't know if it happens. I just don't know if it happens. But to your point, is there a game that changes the trajectory of two programs more, changes the narratives, changes the conversation around those two programs? If Miami goes into Florida and wins, we're having a very different conversation about Miami. Doesn't change the Florida conversation all that much, but it changes the conversation around Miami. Florida wins, it changes the conversation around Miami. So it is utterly fascinating. And to then follow it up 2 weeks later with A&M at home.
Yeah.
I mean, Florida Gators could be the biggest story in September in college football, or they could be an afterthought. And I wouldn't be surprised if they're 3-0 to start the season. I really wouldn't. Yeah.
Then all about that. Then it's just about momentum, because every time they've had it under Billy Napier, it's been yanked out from right under him. So it's got to get there. Braden, we will go to.
Well, they don't have Arkansas. They don't have Arkansas on the schedule this year, so it's fine.
No, that's true. We will go to, and we'll end it right here. The anonymous coach, opposing coach's view here on the Gators. Quote, "It's do or die time." I think a lot of coaches respect how Billy Napier has gone about his business, but there's a level of expectations in the SEC. You have to build your plans around that accelerated pace. We kind of already hit on that one. This one here a bit more too. The coaching staff. Another quote here. The coaching staff is almost totally different, especially on defense. That's the biggest problem we've heard about, that the internal system isn't right there. You bring in Ron Roberts from Auburn, who has history with Austin Armstrong, a pairing there that Billy Napier has had experience all the way back at Louisiana with those two guys together. So that side of the ball has to be fixed. And you bring in Ron Roberts. He made headway in year one at Auburn. You hope that translates to year one at Florida for him. But listening to interviews for him, he's made it like there's no excuses here. He's like, this does not need to look like a new defense. This needs to look like year three Billy Napier. And I've kind of been a fan of how Ron Roberts and how he approaches his return to Billy Napier here. Keep it going. Quote, "The roster will be the best they've had. There was a pretty significant drop in the talent at the end of the Dan Mullen years, but that excuse has run out." Completely agree there. Mertz coming back might save Billy's job. And then to end it here, the schedule is brutal for them, but they should be able to find a way to a bowl. So, I mean, there's not much to disagree there with an opposing. And Braden, clear this up. Is this one coach? Is this multiple coaches? When you guys put these together for these anonymous coaches, anything that you take to heart here, or maybe even agree, disagree?
Multiple coaches for every team. But honestly, some reports like open your eyes to things. Some reports make you question your own beliefs, and then some reports sort of confirm what you think. And I think certainly the conversation about, I think he's done it the right way. I think he's going about it sort of systematically building a program. That first quote there, certainly, but then the SEC, look, hey, it makes you go faster than you think. Dan Mullen roster, no excuse anymore. I think all that stuff sort of validates what we all already think of the program. I think, Mertz coming back, saving his job is just an interesting quote, considering how much I watched of Graham Mertz at Wisconsin. If you'd have told me that quarterback at Wisconsin was going to save the Florida coach's job, I just find that funny. Schedule's brutal. Yeah, sure. The one that's interesting is about the defensive coaching staff. That's the one that stands out to me as intriguing, because obviously, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but like they're probably too passive, too shell, too whatever you want to call it, zone oriented before Austin Armstrong. We knew his MO was to come in and be aggressive, and they're probably too much of that last year. And so where's the right landing spot for that defense? And is it just because you had the youngest coordinator in the history of the Power Five and maybe he was over his skis? Like, I don't know. So I find that quote fascinating, because there's no real answer in there. And there's no real, like, are we sure this is the direction they need to go? Is this, I mean, your analysis on Roberts, I think, is spot on, but we don't know if he's got the dogs to do it, if he's got the dudes in the defense to make that happen. I think a more sound scheme that was probably a little bit, I don't want to say more consistent in critical situations.
There you go.
I think is maybe what I would say. Like that, is that just something that you need somebody with experience to understand when and how and where to pull the trigger on certain things? That's perfectly fine. I think that's perfectly acceptable to analyze. The question is can it be fixed with the decisions that Billy Napier's made? And that's really that to me, that quote more than anything was the most interesting, that they didn't really know what they were doing. I'm paraphrasing here. And it seemed disorganized, and it was the entire system was off. And now you bring in some experience and the whole staff feels different. Is that going to translate to more consistent play in critical situations? We'll see. But I think that ultimately is what's going to decide that. Like, if they get third down stops against Cam Ward, against Miami, they can win the game. If they get third down stops against Texas A&M, they can win the game. If they get third down stops against LSU at home, they can win the game. I mean, it's going to be about the defense getting stops, because I think the offense is going to be pretty efficient no matter what they're doing.
And it's funny on the defensive side of the ball, because there's still a lot of SEC flavor when they left. You have Jay Bateman and Sean Spencer, both are at Texas A&M, and part of that staff with Mike Elko. Corey Raymond goes back to LSU.
Yep.
And Brady, here's the thing about Corey Raymond. Even before, I didn't question the hire for Florida, but go back to his last couple of years at LSU, his 2 years at Florida. He has not been part of a good defense. He has not been part of a good defensive secondary. And that's crazy to say about Corey Raymond, but he left a lot to desire toward his tail end at LSU before coming to Florida, and the last 2 years at Florida.
Yeah. No, it's the defense is going to make or break the season, in my opinion. And again, if it's sort of like, it's interesting we're talking about LSU, because LSU, like, we all expect their defense to get better, but it's all about how much progress do you make. And if LSU's defense makes a ton of progress, we know the offense is going to take a step back. Well, maybe they can make a playoff. If Florida's defense takes a few steps forward and the offense doesn't take any steps back, in fact, they actually go forward, which is possible, then Florida's going to be better than we think. So again, this is where I go back to, we know less about these teams on any given day in the summer than we've ever known before. Like, whether it's June or July or August, whether it's the start of camp or the end of spring practice or magazine season or SEC media days, you pick a date in the summer, and we know less today about any of these teams than we ever have. And I think that's interesting as a fan of the game. I think it's interesting as a fan of the game who loves churn and loves teams that rise and fall. And I love that aspect of college football. Like, somebody is going to be much better than we expect in the SEC. And is that Kentucky? Is that Florida? Is that Auburn? I don't know. But somebody is going. Is it Texas A&M? Somebody is going to be much better. Who's going to be much worse than we expect? Is it Oklahoma? Is it LSU? We don't know. And we know so much less than we've ever known before. And I think you can lean into that as a fan and say, let's see what happens, man. It's roll the dice. Let's have fun. There's only 12 of these Saturdays we get, every year. Let's try to enjoy them and see what roller coaster we're on.
Yeah. On that note, kind of zooming out a little bit, I think I'm a little higher on Tennessee than I am LSU this year.
I agree.
I agree. That's where I'm at with that. So
I agree.
Florida's got to play both, so it don't really matter. But
no, I think you lose to Tennessee and you beat LSU. That's what I would say.
That's where I've been leaning as well this year.
I agree.
Just even taking home and away out of it. I think Tennessee will be better, and I think LSU takes a step back.
Nico is going to be very, very, very special. The question is going to be when, and can he be special by the Oklahoma road trip? Maybe. And if he's good by then, I mean, first of all, the NC State game is really dangerous for Tennessee as well. Yeah. But if they beat NC State and beat Oklahoma, I mean, you got Florida at home, you got Bama at home, you got Kentucky at home. Like, there's not a lot at Arkansas. Is that going to be who knows what Arkansas is at that point? The schedule, give them a loss to Georgia, fine. But if you beat Oklahoma and Nico is good at that point of the season, Tennessee absolutely is a playoff team. They could have. I agree with you. I think Tennessee is better than people expect, and I think LSU's a step back. I think Oklahoma's a step back from what people expect because they also have an incredibly difficult schedule as well. So teams are going to jump up and teams are going to fall down. That is the nature of the game that we are covering.
Yep. Braden Gall, everybody. Athlon does the podcast there. As you said, not much to do with the magazine, or as much to do with the magazine as he does in the past, but certainly still has a say there. But also 440 Sports. What's the SEC podcast you got going on there, Braden?
SEC Football Live, very creatively titled. SEC Football Live. That's Wednesdays at noon Central Standard God's time, 1 o'clock Eastern time. But you can come check us out. We have guests from around the conference, and we kind of cover it in a different way, we think. 440 Sports YouTube page. That's 440 Sports YouTube page. And come on over and hang out. We talk SEC football every single week. So come on over and hang out.
All right, everybody, one more time, Athlon magazine as well.
Yeah,
get that.
For sure.
It's certainly a great read this year. Braden, man, thank you so much for hopping on Gators Breakdown.
Absolutely. Always a pleasure, man.
All right, see ya.
Take it easy.
All right, good stuff there from Braden. And I want to jump back into, before I wrap up this episode, head out on vacation as well. Maybe commit, start flying in. But here we go. I wanted to revisit the most pivotal game topic that we brought up last week on Gators Breakdown because, hey, thank you all so much out there. Certainly a polarizing topic. My pick was Kentucky. I just kind of gave the reasons why they're Braden there. You can go back and listen to last week's. Will pick Tennessee. I think that's obvious reasons as well. But then, I did introduce that topic by saying you can pick so many number of games and you won't be wrong. I think it's pure opinion on this. As I said, if I had to 1A, 1B it, I would do 1A Kentucky, 1B Miami. If I want to separate them, I still went with Kentucky. But, I completely agree. I'll go through one more time. I'm going to make the case for the other games. And Miami is obvious. We just discussed that. But it's game one, year 3 for both coaches, Billy Napier, Mario Cristobal, and a chance to start the season out on a very, very high note with all the questions surrounding Billy Napier. We know the 3:30 kickoff to open up the season. But, the recruits. You've recruited against Miami the last couple of years. So many players knowing each other. But just for all the talk around these coaches, and the most pivotal game for Billy Napier, you can absolutely say, hey, in this critical year where every win is going to matter a whole lot, every loss is going to matter a whole lot, and how you judge Billy Napier moving forward, that Miami game 1, if you can start off on the right foot, get that going, maybe you create some early season momentum for this very, very tough schedule. That one's off. It's obvious. It's obvious why that one can be the most pivotal game. 2 weeks later, Texas A&M. Look, we know Sanford's not pivotal in any imagination here, or should not be. Texas A&M. Now, that one becomes pivotal, I think, in 2 ways, win or loss versus Miami. I think you can go Texas A&M. We had a Gators Breakdown Plus user. I think it was MVP, nothing but positivity. But he was saying A&M because it is Mike Elko won year 1. You can't lose that game if you're Billy Napier at home to Mike Elko year 1. Year 1 Mike Elko at Texas A&M. But at the same time, take it further. What happens against Miami, win or lose? Win, you keep that momentum going. How many times have we talked about momentum? And Billy Napier. You beat Utah in season 1, game 1, only to get your brains beat in by Kentucky. Kentucky's defense just comes into the swamp and completely controls Anthony Richardson. You can't get anything going on offense. You lose that game. Can't keep the momentum going. And then last year, you beat Tennessee after the loss to Utah, have a lot of momentum there. You play lackadaisical versus Charlotte the next week. But the first real game after beating Tennessee, you go on the road to Kentucky and get your brains beat in by Kentucky. So you haven't been able to sustain the momentum after big wins. If you get that big win versus Miami, Texas A&M becomes pivotal. Now, look, of course, you can do all this for the games the way the season plays out. But Texas A&M becomes pivotal because you want to keep the momentum going if you're Billy Napier in this hard schedule. But just also prove that you can keep momentum going because we've seen it falter all throughout his tenure so far. Whether it be on the recruiting trail, in last year's close to the class. But on the field, I just gave the explanations. Then if you lose to Miami, you circle Texas A&M because it is a chance to get back on track. It's your first conference game. And for those other reasons why you shouldn't lose this game, you need to bounce back and win that one. You can't start off 0-2 versus your, the marquee opponents in those first 3 games. Mississippi State, the only reason it would be pivotal, it's your first road game. Your first road game in the SEC, and you can't lose to Jeff Lebby, first-time head coach there as well. Not as many as that one. Not as many reasons for that one to be pivotal compared to Miami, Texas A&M. I've seen some people go UCF, and that one being pivotal because you just can't lose to little brother at home. You can't lose to UCF in year 3 of Billy Napier if you're taking this thing in the right direction. Now, Gus Malzahn, plenty of experience. KJ Jefferson at quarterback. He killed you last year at Arkansas. That's a pivotal game because you just can't lose. If Florida is Florida, you don't lose to UCF, and you especially don't lose to them at home. A lot of the will you have, good or bad, or a lot of goodwill you would have by that point would kind of go away if you lose to UCF. Tennessee, pivotal. Discussed that last week with Will. We won't dive too much into that, but of course, you got the just recent domination of them over the last 30 years. Another road game. Keep some momentum going. Tennessee and Kentucky, we discussed that last week. Georgia, in a lot of ways, is the most pivotal because it's the toughest opponent you'll probably play. It's your biggest rival in the conference that you'll play. But it's not as pivotal just because of where Florida is and where Georgia is. It's always pivotal. It's overall pivotal. But them and Texas kind of this year, they kind of fit in that same boat. Not expected to win that game, so they're not as pivotal. You kind of chalk those up to losses going into the season. I'm not saying you want to, as a fan, you want to chalk up any game, but if you had to pick wins and losses, if you were going to Vegas to bet your money right now, you wouldn't be putting it on Florida to beat Georgia and Texas. I think LSU can be pivotal. I mean, just think about the history of that game. It passed Tennessee in the 90s. It started becoming LSU as that most pivotal game, and it gave you an indication of what Florida was going to be. Now, most of the time it meant if Florida was going to be an SEC championship contender or not, depending on what happened versus LSU. Not so much right now. But that's a pivotal game. It's late in the season. It's coming off of Georgia and Texas. It's a chance to get back on the right track. It's a home game. You're back at home. That game is pivotal there. You maybe get something going late in the season. But kind of the same thing for Ole Miss here. Winnable game at home. I still think LSU and Ole Miss are winnable. As I sit here right now in June, I think LSU and Ole Miss are kind of very similar, but more history with LSU and what that has meant for Florida as far as being pivotal. And then Florida State at the end of the year, you can say that's the most pivotal because you need to end the season on a high note. You need to get off the snide of losing to Florida State. You don't want to go 3 straight losses to the Seminoles. And a lot like the first game versus Miami, it's a chance to beat an in-state rival. Start getting some questions asked about them. We know there's a lot of recruiting battles for Florida State right now. I mean, say Florida season's going pretty well. Florida State season's going pretty well. And we've talked about all the recruiting battles the last couple of weeks for Florida State. Could that be a decision maker between some players with that last game of the season? But for Florida State, yeah, it's a chance to get back on the winning side of that rivalry and end the season on a high note. That's why I think you can say that one. That would actually probably be my number 3. I think Kentucky, Miami, Florida State are my top 3. And probably be UCF behind that because that's just, as far as the way you look at that one and how pivotal it is, it's just because you can't lose that game. Now, a win, I think, will mean a whole lot for the rest of it because it just puts a win on Florida's schedule, but a loss to UCF hurts more than a win over UCF helps more, I think, in the perception of Florida. But there we go. A quick little look through the schedule one more time, at least of why certain games can be the most pivotal. I enjoyed hearing from all of you. If you're going to continue that conversation, leave it in the comments there. But yeah, I think that's a lot of ways you can look at those certain games. But all right, there we go. Thanks to Braden one more time for hopping on here on Gators Breakdown. And also thank you for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown. I'll be on vacation. I'm going to be enjoying some quality time off. A lot of drinks there. We're just going to be having a good time. I'll be keeping up with some stuff on social media, but don't expect any episodes till probably mid next week. Not even taking the stuff with me. Just going to enjoy the time off. But that would do it for this episode of Gators Breakdown. One more time, thank you for joining me, guys and girls out there. And I hope to catch you on the next episode of Gators Breakdown.